Okay, all right, we're live. Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for another of Upsolve's live Monday night webinars. I hope you've had a good Monday. I know I have. And today's topic is going to be Bankruptcy Made Simple, your guide to a fresh start with Upsolve. And we're going to be interviewing my guest here, Claire Robinson, Upsolve's Director of Bankruptcy. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Ben Jackson. I'm one of the co-founders of Upsolve and host of the Break Free podcast. And a little bit about my story, and then I'll shut up and let Claire talk. But about 9 years ago, I had a small business fail, and it left me with $60,000 in credit card debt. I was only making like $20,000 a year driving for Uber and Lyft, and I ended up on food stamps and was super ashamed, and I felt like the American dream had kind of failed me and that I had failed, and it was just a terrible situation. But bankruptcy helped me break free and restart my life. It led me to law school and eventually to co-founding Upsolve to help other people reclaim their financial freedom. And that is why I'm thrilled to introduce our guest tonight, Claire Robinson. As I mentioned, she's Upsolve's Director of Bankruptcy. She has extensive experience in bankruptcy and has helped thousands of people successfully navigate the bankruptcy process through Upsolve. She has a deep knowledge of both bankruptcy and the Upsolve platform, and that makes her the perfect person to guide you through today's session. So Claire, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thrilled to be here.
So before we dive into some questions, I was just wondering if you could explain to the audience, how do you describe yourself and the work that you do in debt relief?
Great question. So I am Claire Robinson. I'm Upsolve's Director of Bankruptcy. What that means day to day is that I'm supporting Upsolve users going through the bankruptcy process and designing the product to make it work better, more efficient, more effective for everyone that's going through it. The reason that I came into this work is a few years ago, I had a personal medical crisis and was unable to work. So I went from being self-sufficient and sustainable to relying on friends and family for my basic needs like housing and food. And it made me really passionate about what financial distress does to both our financial lives and our emotional lives. So really passionate about bringing the relief that bankruptcy can offer to people, both financially and emotionally.
I love that. I feel like there's so many people who have a medical emergency sort of the core of their financial challenges. Do you see the same, Claire?
Unfortunately, it's really common. One of the most common reasons that people file for bankruptcy is medical debt. That debt can be crippling, both because the debt can be so large, but also because the health challenges that come with whatever medical intervention happens can be really challenging and make it really hard to get back on your feet.
Are there some other common reasons that you see? I know one of the things that I care most about is sort of destigmatizing the idea of bankruptcy, right? Like, I think society tells us if we file bankruptcy, we're a failure, but I think the reality is this is the only way out for people who just kind of experience some of the crap that life can throw at you. Like, what are some of the other things that you've seen as reasons for people to file?
Yeah, it's a really common misconception about bankruptcy that people are filing bankruptcy because they've made some huge financial mistake or they're overspending. But at Upsolve, the most common thing that we see is some crisis that has happened or just the cost of living being really difficult to meet. It's often basic living expenses put on a credit card that become the debt that use what someone needs to use bankruptcy to file on. So it's important to realize bankruptcy is not a failing. Being in debt is not a failing. And you are allowed to access that benefit, regardless of whether it's your fault, but most often it's not.
I love that. So, Claire, thanks for sharing your story. I want to get into some FAQ. I think that's what the people have joined us for. Before we do that, just so everybody understands kind of how this is going to work, we're going to go through some general topics about Upsolve, about bankruptcy, things that Claire often hears from users. And as we're talking, you can feel free to throw anything that you want to ask as a question in the chat. We'll love to answer those things as they pop up. If we don't get to the answer or we don't know the answer, we'll try to give the answer after the webinar in the show notes. So first question for you, Claire. Can you briefly explain what Chapter 7 bankruptcy is and who it's for?
Yeah, great question. So Chapter 7 bankruptcy is a legal process that you can go through in order to relieve debt. What bankruptcy does is it clears what's called dischargeable debts, which are debts that are allowed to be relieved through bankruptcy, and gives you a fresh start on those debts so that you can rebuild your finances and begin to have financial stability again. So what that process looks like is filling out the required bankruptcy forms, taking them to the court. When you file, you'll be assigned a bankruptcy trustee, someone who oversees the case. They'll review your documentation. You'll have a meeting with the trustee, and if all goes well, at the end of the process, you'll be given a document that says you've received a discharge, your debt is cleared, and you'll be able to move forward. Ben, I'm so sorry, I lost your audio.
I muted myself. Fun times, everybody. So how do you know if the bankruptcy that you filed worked or didn't work? Like, I feel like dealing with the court can be really confusing. So, like I had a speeding ticket one time and I had no idea, like, where am I supposed to go? When am I supposed to go there? So, like, is it fairly clear what's happening when you file bankruptcy?
So court processes in general can be really confusing. If you're using Upsolve to file for bankruptcy, in your Upsolve account, you'll be able to see exactly what's happening in your case, both before you file and after you file. If you aren't filing for bankruptcy through Upsolve, you'll be able to use an online tool called Pacer, which allows you to see your court documents and understand what's happening in the case. And if you're ever confused about what's happening in those court records, you can go on upsolve.org and we have learn articles on what each of the court docket instructions mean. You also are going to have the court as a resource to you as you're filing. The people who work in the bankruptcy courts do this because they want to help people. So they are a resource for you as you're going through the process. The trustee will be available to answer any questions. And the bankruptcy court clerks, some former bankruptcy court clerks on our Upsolve staff are really helpful and available for any questions you might have if something isn't clear. You're muted again, Ben.
I got to keep myself muted, everybody. So what else does Upsolve do to help with this process? Like, is it just articles in education and support, or like, what is the thing that Upsolve does?
Yeah, so there's 3 prongs to Upsolve. The first section of Upsolve is our learning content. We have thousands of attorney-written articles on bankruptcy and debt to help you understand what Chapter 7 bankruptcy is, what the process looks like, and specific aspects of filing for bankruptcy, like what bankruptcy exemptions are, or can you keep your vehicle? So there's incredible resources there that you should definitely check out if you're considering filing or going through the process. The second thing that Upsolve offers is a tool to help you decide if bankruptcy is the right fit or if some other debt relief process may be better. We call this our debt assistant. You can go through and answer questions about your current financial situation, and Upsolve will give you some information about which options may or may not be a good fit. The last thing that we offer, sort of our flagship product at Upsolve, is our bankruptcy tool. What this tool does is it helps you generate the bankruptcy documents that you need in order to file. So you'll go through a guided questionnaire that'll ask you questions about your income, your expenses, your current financial situation, your debts. And at the end of the process, you'll get a bankruptcy packet, which will have all of the documents you need to file, as well as instructions for exactly what you need to do moving forward.
Oh my God. I wish that I'd had something like that when I filed bankruptcy. Oh man, those late nights of like every paper that's ever existed in my life stacked on my bed, fire hazard style. Like, I wish I had had that help from Upsolve. So when looking through some of the questions coming through here. Okay, so what documents should people get together before they start filing? Like, I'm looking at my resources, this person says, and I'm wondering, like, do I need all of this? Do I need none of this? What should I have before I start working with Upsolve to file bankruptcy?
Yeah, great question. So there's 2 things here. There's one, which is documents that might help you fill out the bankruptcy forms. And then there's also documents that the bankruptcy court is going to require when you file. So I'll start with the latter. When you file, you'll need to provide pay stubs tax returns, and some additional documentation that's required by the court. Depending on the circumstances, there may be other documents that are required, but those are the two that almost everyone needs. But in addition to those documents, as you're going through and working on your bankruptcy forms, things like letters from debt collectors to help you figure out what debts you owe, bank statements so that you can figure out what your income and expenses are, or other financial records can be helpful for you as you are filling out all of the information that's required. So for most Upsolvers, what they do when they start the process is they make a big stack of all of the financial documents that they have, and then they'll go through them as they're answering the questions that the Upsolve tool provides. Generally, if you gather it up front, it makes it a lot easier later down the road so that you're not halfway through the process and then going and digging in your inbox to figure out some other piece of information.
So get ready in advance. So Ashley is asking, it appears as if Upsolve will help people prepare the documents to actually file for bankruptcy. Will that be accurate? I can answer that one. Yes, that is what Upsolve does. There are a bunch of forms. I can't remember exactly the number. Claire, do you remember the number?
Oh gosh, 15, 20, yeah. It's a lot.
And they're all like at least like 8-9 pages long. So you're talking like 100+ pages of forms. They can be challenging. The tool that we have, you can think of as like TurboTax for bankruptcy. It'll ask you the questions in human language that it needs to fill out those forms. Then it will fill out the forms and give them to you with steps explaining how to file. And Claire, what do you see as the success rate for those filings on average? I don't know if that's something you can share.
Yeah, I can. Before I share that, one important thing to note is that Upsolve isn't your attorney, which means that the Upsolve tool doesn't verify any of the information you provide. So when you're using Upsolve, you're still a self-represented filer, which means you should go through all of the documents and review them. But thousands and thousands of people have used Upsolve to file successfully. It's over 90% of Upsolvers that file with our tool ultimately have a successful discharge, which is incredible. It's significantly higher than the success rate for people who just do it on their own. So hopefully that leaves you with some trust that while Upsolve isn't doing the process for you, it's a great friend and guide as you're going through this process.
Oh, I love that. So what are the most common mistakes that people typically make when they're going through the bankruptcy filing process?
That's a great question. For people who aren't using Upsolve, one of the most common mistakes is misinterpreting the questions on the bankruptcy forms. Unfortunately, the way our system works, a lot of these documents are written in really complex legalese or language for attorneys. So that means it's really difficult to understand what the heck they're even asking you for when you're filling out these forms. The other common pitfall is, as you're filling out this complex information, it's easy to forget things. As you're going through the bankruptcy process, you'll be asked to list all of your debts and all of your assets or things that you own. That can be tedious and a little bit time consuming. So it's important as you're going through the process to take your time, look through material you have. The more thorough and accurate your documents are, the more likely it is that you're going to have a successful resolution to your case.
So if I start working with Upsolve, am I required to finish it? What happens? Does it start something with the court? Can I stop if I decide bankruptcy is not right for me?
Yeah, great question. Upsolve will never file anything on your behalf, and you can stop anytime. We'll send you little emails to nudge you along the way. We really do believe that bankruptcy can be a great fresh start, but it's not right for everyone. If you have questions as you're going through about whether this is the best fit for you or how to navigate the process, our Learning Center is a great resource and our support team is a great resource. We're always happy to answer any questions you have along the way.
So speaking of questions I have on the way, I just filed bankruptcy. What's the next thing that's going to happen?
Yeah, great question. So once you file bankruptcy, it opens a court case for you. After that court case is open, you'll be assigned a bankruptcy trustee. That's someone that the bankruptcy court appoints to oversee your case. So they'll review your documentation, and then they'll schedule something called the 341 meeting. That's a meeting with the trustee where they may ask you some questions. And after that, creditors will have the option to object to your discharge. This is really rare. It doesn't happen often. And then once the trustee has reviewed everything, they will either approve your case or request that you make changes to your document called amendments. And then if that is all done, you'll receive your bankruptcy discharge.
So who is this trustee person? Is this like a judge? Like, do I need to, if they send me a letter or something like that, do I have to respond to them? Like, what's my relationship with them?
Great question. So they're not a judge. There are bankruptcy judges, but for most of the Chapter 7 filings, you wouldn't be interacting with the judge directly. However, they are the legal overseer of your case. So if they send you an email or they make a request of you, it is important to follow through on that.
Gotcha. So I think this person's saying that they think they got a letter from their trustee. Do you know what that letter is called by chance, Claire? The letter you'll typically get from them with your 341 scheduling?
I don't know what the letter is called. It may be a letter that's telling you when that 341 meeting is taking place. Okay. If it is, and there's a meeting link or information, that's when you'll attend, meet with the trustee and talk with them. Mm-hmm. It is important to attend that meeting. It's possible that your bankruptcy case won't be successful if you don't attend. If you're a little bit later on in the process, it might be something called the report of no distribution from the trustee, which means that it's not scary. It's written in a confusing way. Who knows why? But it basically means that there's not assets that are going to be sold off to pay back creditors. That's a common one that can be confusing. So if you see that, that's what it means. Nothing to be afraid of.
Got it. Ashley, you've asked this question in the chat. I love it. It's so proper sounding. Your English is great. I love it. So Ashley says, how long does it usually take for Upsolve to review one's documents and prepare the official ones for the court?
Yeah, fantastic question. So when Upsolve users are going through the process, our software will generate the documents, and then our team does a quick review of those documents to see if there were any software glitches that happened as our tool was generating the documents. That process usually takes about a week, but it can take up to 2 weeks. So important to allocate time for that review process as you're thinking about the timeline for your filing.
Got it. And Derek and Ryan, I don't know if it's Ryan or Ryan, so my apologies if I'm mispronouncing it. What type of debts can be discharged in a bankruptcy?
Great question. So I'm going to get into legal terms, so bear with me. There's 2 types of debts when you're thinking about bankruptcy. One is what's called dischargeable debts. Those are debts that are eligible to be discharged in bankruptcy. The really common type of dischargeable debt is something like a credit card. There are also non-dischargeable debts, which are debts that bankruptcy law doesn't allow to be wiped out by bankruptcy. Those might be things like child support payments or certain types of tax debts. If you're confused about what types of debt you have, we have a Learning Center article on this. I think it's called "What Types of Debt Can I Erase with Bankruptcy?" That walks through all of the different types of debts and whether they're eligible or not eligible to be discharged in a bankruptcy filing.
Are there assets that can prevent somebody from being eligible for successful bankruptcy? When would you advise hiring an attorney, since Upsolve is not legal representation?
Yeah, great question. I'll tackle the second piece of that first, which is when to hire an attorney. So when you go to Upsolve's website, if you're interested in filing for bankruptcy with Upsolve, you'll take a screener, and that'll tell you whether Upsolve is able to help in your case or whether it might be a good fit to hire an attorney. Generally, the people who are going to want to hire attorneys are people with really complex cases or people with very significant assets. So for example, if you own a home, generally speaking, it's going to be better to file with an attorney. Upsolve's tool won't be able to assist in that circumstance. And I lost the first piece of the question, Ben. Can you restate it for me?
Yeah, first piece of the question was, are there assets that can prevent somebody from being eligible for a successful bankruptcy?
That's a great question. So having certain assets doesn't automatically disqualify you from filing for bankruptcy. but it may mean that it's not a good idea to file, and there may be another option that's a better fit. So in bankruptcy, there's something called exemptions. These are laws that allow bankruptcy filers to protect certain types of property. So for example, there may be a bankruptcy exemption that allows you to keep up to $5,000 of equity in a vehicle. If you review the exemptions that are available in your area and you find that there's significant assets that you own that may not be covered by those exemptions, it may be a good sign to either talk to an attorney or consider another debt relief option. This is really individual and it's a personal decision. So it's a good idea to research what exemptions may be available to you before making the decision to file.
So this user is asking, are there other circumstances where you just straight up can't file bankruptcy? So you're just not eligible regardless of what happens to your property?
That's a great question. There are a few things that are required for filing bankruptcy. Some of them are just logistical, like you have to take a credit counseling class before you file and won't be able to file if you don't do that. But there are also certain rules for who can file and who can't. The most important one to keep in mind is what's called the bankruptcy means test. This is a complex calculation about your income and expenses that determines whether you're eligible to file. If you go through the bankruptcy tool with Upsolve, the tool will help you determine whether you meet or don't meet that means test. You can also learn more online about exactly what goes into that calculation.
Great, thanks, Claire. Carrie's asking, when applying with Upsolve, if I'm not sure how to answer certain questions or I can't find the relevant paperwork, will Upsolve let me leave items blank or write unknown?
That's a great question. You can't, when you're filing with Upsolve, you can't write unknown on the documents. All the questions that are being asked on the form are required and an important part of the filing. But if you're having a difficult time finding certain information, I really encourage you to reach out to our support team. We've got lots of tips and tricks up our sleeve for ways to hunt down information that might be difficult to find. We've not our first rodeo in terms of hunting down creditors that may be hard to find or addresses that may be difficult to find or other information. So generally speaking, yes, you're going to want to answer all of the questions that are asked. If you're having a hard time doing that, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to give some tips and tricks.
So you said not our first rodeo, Claire. I'm curious, how many bankruptcy filings has Upsolve done at this point?
It's about 15,000 families have filed bankruptcy with Upsolve.
Yeah, so 15,000 rodeos. I feel like that takes the cake there. This user is asking, we answered that about what kinds of debts. What does Upsolve cost?
So Upsolve is free. We are a nonprofit, so we will not charge you anything for filing with Upsolve. For most Upsolvers, that means the process of filing bankruptcy is completely free. Because a lot of our Upsolve users qualify for fee waivers so that they don't have to pay the bankruptcy filing fees. If you don't qualify for a fee waiver, there may also be a court fee that applies, but it's not a fee from Upsolve. It's a fee from the bankruptcy court.
So you mentioned hiring lawyers earlier. If I do choose to hire a lawyer, how much would it cost?
It depends on your case and the area you're located in, but it's usually about $3,000 to hire a bankruptcy attorney.
$3,000 to get out of debt. If I had $3,000, I wouldn't be in debt in the first place. That's crazy. Okay, let's see what else we've got in here. Thanks, Vaya. Learned a lot today. Go, Claire, go. I learn a lot every time I talk to Claire. How long will it take to complete my forms using Upsolve?
This depends a bit, but I usually recommend planning on it taking about a week. You'll do it in a few sessions. So maybe in total, it's going to take 5 to 6 hours to answer all of the questions that Upsolve has. But it's better to start the process earlier if you can, before it's an emergency, so you have time to gather all of the information that you need.
5 to 6 hours is not bad. I remember when I was doing my bankruptcy application, just totally haphazardly, I think it took me like 5 to 6 months. So 5 to 6 hours is good.
I'm not surprised. It is a complex process when you're doing it on your own, and digesting all of that legal language can be really time consuming.
So if I do decide that I want to work with a lawyer, how do I find one?
So there's a few ways to find one. One easy way to find one is Upsolve has a lawyer referral service. We have great attorneys in our network that we like and trust. So if you go to upsolve.org/find a lawyer, and maybe we can drop the link in the chat or send it over to the attendees afterwards. You can enter information. I think it's your name, your phone number, and your location, and Upsolve will match you with an attorney that might be a good fit. We also have seen people have success with Googling bankruptcy attorneys in my area. As with any attorney, there's a range in terms of who's out there and who you're going to click with most as your representation. So I highly encourage everyone, if you are planning on filing with an attorney, to take advantage of the free consultations that most of them offer. You can speak with them, ask a few questions, and just get a sense of, is this lawyer a good fit for me?
What if I decide that I don't want to file bankruptcy, but I do want to try to get rid of my debt? What options do I have? I tried the Dave Ramsey method and it didn't work for me.
Yeah, there's a few other options. A lot of times when people are thinking about other debt relief options, they're thinking about debt settlement, which is when you negotiate with your creditor to pay them a portion of your debt in exchange for having the rest charged off. There's also the option of a debt management plan where you work with what's called the credit counseling agency to lower your interest rates and create a payment plan for your debts. And then there's debt consolidation, which is when you're able to get a lower interest rate on your debts by combining them. There's pros and cons to all of these different options. If you have more questions about them, our debt assistant tool on upsolve.org is a good first starting point to figure out what these options are, if you might qualify for them, and ask questions about each option.
This is saying, I've heard of National Debt Relief Solutions. What are they and how does that compare to Upsolve?
And that might be a good question for you if you're more.
So there are a lot of companies that advertise all sorts of debt relief services on TV. Many of them are doing debt settlement, which is the thing Claire mentioned a second ago. The challenge is not all of them are doing debt settlement in a way that actually makes sense for you. So National Debt Relief, I believe it's a settlement. I won't say for sure. Claire, if you want to look that up while I'm talking, and you can tell us for sure in a second. But what will often happen with these companies is they have relationships with banks. You pay them, they call the banks on your behalf, and they negotiate down the total amount that you have to repay. The challenge with that is they'll usually take some percentage of the difference between what you owed and what you paid. So let's say that you owed $10,000 and the company was able to negotiate it down to $3,000. So they saved you $7,000. Here's the rub with that though. Usually they'll charge you some percentage of that $7,000. So let's say that it's, 30%. So now you're paying them $2,100 in fees, and you end up paying taxes on the $7,000 that they saved you. So you end up in a position with quite a few expenses where something like bankruptcy would have, in many cases, gotten rid of that debt entirely. So the services can work. I would suggest that when you see one that seems great, you do a little bit of research, make sure you check the reviews, Better Business Bureau, etc. And the thing you really want to watch out for with any company that's advertising is if they ask you to pay them before they do anything. If there is no guarantee that comes with this, right? Like maybe they won't get you a settlement. Maybe you owe $10,000 and the bank only accepts $10,000. Well, now you just paid money for nothing. So be wary of ones that don't do anything, that charge you before they do anything for you. And did you find out, Claire, do they primarily do settlement?
I did. They do primarily do debt settlement.
Okay. Last question here. Can certain student loans be discharged through bankruptcy?
Great question. So right now, it is possible to file bankruptcy on certain types of student loans in certain circumstances. Right now, it is federal loans that are eligible for discharge. So if you have a private student loan, it's not possible to go through the bankruptcy discharge process with that. And upsolvers need to meet certain hardship criteria in order to file bankruptcy on their student loans. That might be being unemployed for 10 years or more, or having a disability. There's other hardship criteria that can allow you to file bankruptcy on student loans. Unfortunately, it is not everyone that's able to file bankruptcy on student loans. It is just a small segment. But if you're interested in considering filing bankruptcy on student loans, the Upsolve tool can help with that. Last year, we released a tool to be able to generate forms for student loan, what's called adversary proceedings, which is the process that you would go through to file specifically on student loans. And the tool will let you know if that might be a good fit or not.
Very cool. That's a game changer, being able to get out of student loans. Cool. Well, that's all the time that we have for tonight, folks. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us, who asked questions in the chat. Claire, thank you, as always, for being so knowledgeable and so willing to share that with everybody. For those who aren't aware, we have a podcast Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the Break Free podcast, where I go through ways to get out of debt, ways to rebuild your life after debt, how to find a little bit more financial joy. We do this webinar every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You can always come with the questions you have. Claire, is there anything that you want to share with the audience about how they can contact you or ask questions of Upsolve?
Yeah, thank you everyone so much for joining. Great to talk to you. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this. So really excited to share the knowledge and optimism for your financial future in this session and via email. If you want to reach out to me and my support team, you can head to upsolve.org/contact and send us a message. And maybe we can also post emails in the chat if you want to reach me directly.
Great. Well, don't post too many personal emails in there, because the last one of these we did had 4,000 views, so we might blow you up. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Claire. It was great having you here, and thank you, everybody. We will